It looks like we are live on YouTube now, so I want to welcome everybody to the Friday morning edition of the House Energy and Technology Committee hearing. It is budget day in our hearing this morning, and we've got a whole pretty big group of guests here today from the Agency of Digital Services. Later, we're going to turn to the Department of Public Service. We've got about 4 hours of work that we're going to try and cram into 2 hours this morning. So I'm hoping we can be disciplined and focused, as we always are. First up, I want to welcome Secretary Quinn and his team to discuss the Agency of Digital Services budget. Some of us were present in the Appropriations Committee last week for an overview of that, which was helpful. I had asked the agency to present some additional information just to provide a little more clarity on how some of that funding works through the general fund budget and how ADS works with other agencies in the executive. There's a presentation on our website for folks who are watching on YouTube, and I believe the secretary is going to pull that up on our screen and go through that. I'd like to spend the bulk of our time with ADS this morning working through some of the projects that ADS has on the front burner, working with, for example, the unemployment insurance system at the Department of Labor, the ongoing work with integrated eligibility. I know there's some work in the governor's budget being proposed for the DMV. So that variety of things I'd like to spend some the focus of our time on this morning. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to hand this over to Secretary Quinn. And actually, one other thing I want to mention, two guests that we have this morning, Representative Feltus, who is our representative who we work with on a number of these issues on the Appropriations Committee. So Marty, welcome, and certainly feel free to put your hand up and ask questions, obviously, with the other members of the committee. And I'd also like to welcome Dan Smith, who is a consultant who works with the Joint Fiscal Office on behalf of the legislature on IT issues. And also, Dan, I'm going to welcome you to offer comments later after we receive some of the information from ADS, and certainly feel free to join in the discussion, any questions you have. So welcome, Marty, and welcome, Dan, and welcome, John, and your team. I'll let you call on your team as you see fit, and you can take over the screen if you'd like to put that presentation up. So thank you for joining us.
Sure. We're going to have Kate Slocum, the Chief Financial Officer for the Agency of Digital Services, start, and we're going to start on slide 9. Which will explain the structure of how we're funded.
Hello, committee. Kate Slocum, CFO for ADS. So largely ADS is funded with an internal service fund. And by use of an internal service fund, we recoup all of our costs that we experience through different avenues of recoupment. We like to call them lines of business. And there's really two major, and they're between allocation and demand. And then within the demand, there's some subcategories. So I'll just walk through those really quickly. We have the ADS allocation, which is a cost that covers more or less the base IT needs for state government. There's a listing here. It covers internet, video conferencing, Vermont.gov management, our service desk activities, firewalls and VPN, cybersecurity. So there's an exhaustive list here, but essentially it is just those real, true, necessary operating expenditures that we have to carry as a state in order to have a successful IT enterprise. How we go about recapturing those costs is through an allocation bill, ADS allocation bill. We work with finance and management to come up with a total head count for the year within each agency. We take our total costs for these items, and then we calculate it down to what that cost is per head count and spread that across the state. This has been found the best way to pay for those costs while capitalizing on federal dollars, and using general funds the best that we can. Also ensuring that everyone is kind of paying for their fair share. We've looked at other options. There's been a lot of questions about how could we maybe spread these costs differently. And we always come back to this allocation methodology as being the most sound. It's also very similar to how other states recoup these costs. So we're not unique in this type of funding mechanism. So next slide, John. So then now I'm going to move into the demand section of our internal service fund. One of the major pieces of the demand section is something we call our service level agreement, also referred to as the SLA. These cover things that we can actually drill into the actual user of. Things like the enterprise application for Microsoft, Adobe licenses, private cloud usage, go-to, where we can say, okay, this agency has a need for this item, and we can drill it down to that server or that license, and appropriately bill out the department annually for those costs. This does help us capitalize best on federal funds that exist. And because we can get to that actual use of a license by user in this area, departments can then work with their own federal allocation methodology that they might have for their federal grants, like an AHS. This gives them enough transparency to hit those federal programs the way they should be hit for costs. The next part of our demand services, slide 12, is the timesheet and demand services. So we have staff within ADS that we bill out at an hourly rate. Those are like, for instance, project management services, the enterprise architects, security staff that are working on specific security functions. Those are all billed out at a specific rate for services rendered. Again, it's primarily around projects that have specific funding allocations, whether it be federal or general or a special fund. We do track internally where staff are working, what projects they're working on, and then on a monthly basis, we bill out those costs at the hourly rate. So there's two pools. There's the first pool that I talked about that's billed out at $88 an hour. And then there's a second pool, which is the non-enterprise application support. So these are the technologists that are working on certain applications that support department functions across the state. The reason why there's two different rates is that in general, the first $88 an hour rate, those are primarily more expensive services, really linked back to staffing costs. And the actual technologist, it's a little bit less expensive. So rather than rolling it into one rate, we came up with a rate structure for the type of services. And as you see on the slide, I depict how we come up with that rate. We've done some comparison with other financial offices across the state to say, how does this compare to what you paid for previously in your budgets compared to today? And when you actually take the salary costs, the true operating costs, the true indirect costs that departments were paying prior, it is almost right on to the money for what we're billing out in the rate. You know, I had one finance office say that early on. We've vetted it a couple times. There's it's a pretty confident apples to apples comparison there. So, you know, I just want to point that out to folks that it's an all comprehensive rate that includes salary, that overhead, that direct operating need, and any indirect that.
So, Kate, this is Tim Briglin. Can I interrupt with a question?
Of course.
So again, this is really helpful background, and I want to jump to a question. I hope this isn't jumping too far ahead, but a question that I had from the Appropriations Committee hearing last week, and kind of looking through your presentation in advance this morning, which is a number of these expenses look very predictable looking forward, over the year. The internal service fund allocation page that you had up, what an agency's internet and network connectivity is going to cost over the course of the year. Some of those things look very predictable. The thing that seems less predictable and maybe requires more discipline is the demand side stuff. And looking earlier in your presentation, what the demand side costs have been over the course of the year have deviated in actuality relative to what we have budgeted at the beginning of the year. Yep. And I want to ask about that. Why is that?
Sure. So in the slide, I think it was slide 8, we show those trend lines of ADS budget for demand services versus actual spend. There was a very wide gap in FY20. And I will say part of that has to do, not all of it, but a part of it has to do with the CRF and the COVID response activities that have been going on. So when I put together that actual demand spend, it does include unforeseen costs for FY20. So I do have to put that caveat in there. Now, the other piece I would say is that it certainly is a very difficult number for ADS to budget. We work, and we're getting much better at this, but we do work with departments to try and understand their demand sides, what projects are forthcoming. But we're doing that prediction a year to 18 months in advance of the services actually happening. So timing can be a challenge in that, when you're talking about a federally funded project, when we're having those conversations 18 months in advance, it's likely that the department has not yet gone through their RFP process. So they might not know what the true cost would be, and that could be a pressure. Or they are yet to apply for that federal grant. So they're not sure if they're actually going to go live with that project, or they are going to go live, they haven't gotten approval from the feds. So there's a lot of variability that exists when trying to make that prediction. We have all IT purchasing that flows through our budget. So we do try to, look at all of the annual renewals for software, all of the deployment plans that are necessary for the coming fiscal year, and we capture that. But then there's the one-off needs to support projects that may have just sprung up, or maybe they got moved up in the timeline, and we, had to respond to that. And it could add a pressure.
Thank you. That's helpful. Robin, did you have a question?
It's a technical request, and I'm wondering if Kate can shrink the options bar to make so the presentation's a little larger. I can't read the writing on the slides actually.
Let me work on it.
Okay. Oh, it's your screen, John.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Robin, that's going to cost you $88 an hour.
Fully loaded right now.
How to do it in 30 seconds.
There we go.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Are there other high-level points you'd like to cover on this, Kate, before we move into the project stuff?
The only other thing is that two other parts to our demand. Very simply, we have telephony services that we provide that's based on usage for analog and VoIP lines. And then we have bespoke charges, which are for things like independent reviews, hardware and software. We don't upcharge any of that. It's a 1-for-1. Whatever the cost is from the vendor, we pass that on to the department that it's supporting. So that just wraps up how we recoup all costs borne at ADS through our internal service fund.
Great, thank you. Representative Campbell, Scott, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Just a minor question. Kate, you mentioned that you bill allocation charges by head count. Is it by person or is it by FTE?
That's a great question. It's by FTE. So
Okay.
we do not bill out for temp employees. It's really by those classified employees that exist, classified and exempt employees that exist in each department.
All right, great, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay,
Great.
so
Thank you, Kate.
Chair Briglin, where would you like us to go from here? Would you like the rest of the presentation, or would you like to jump right into the projects?
Well, I think some of it is covered in your presentation, but in my simplistic layman's linear way of thinking, let me tell you what I've kind of outlined in my mind. And I think some of it is covered in your presentation and some of it maybe isn't, and we can just speak to. But there are kind of three general areas I'd like to cover. Part of review and also looking forward. We did a lot of work, this committee, and obviously your agency did a lot of work back in May and June on H966 and the CRF requests and funding that came out of that. This committee discussed some requests from ADS. One was a $4 million request for modernizing the ERP system for HR management and government. We did support that recommendation. Excuse me, we did not support that recommendation. And subsequently, I think that request went to the Joint Fiscal Committee. And I'm not sure, I think that was a $5 million request. So I'd like to understand what's going on with that. That wasn't an H966, but it did subsequently go to the Joint Fiscal Committee. So I'd like to understand what's going on with the ERP modernization for HR management. That's one thing. Obviously, the unemployment insurance situation is very much front of mind for folks. Again, back in June, ADS had a $4 million request broken up amongst a number of areas. It was something that this committee supported funding. I think it was ultimately removed by the Senate. So that didn't make it into the CRF funding, but then subsequently this summer, a much smaller amount of money was put into UI modernization work. I think $750,000 was a number that rings a bell. So those are some of the things that didn't get done in 966. Part of 966, there was a $2 million appropriation in there for mitigating cybersecurity risks. So I'm interested in what's going on, with that project, with that money, which presumably has to be completed by the end of the year. So that's kind of one category of things I'd like to have the committee get an update on. And again, that's related to some of the CRF spending that was requested by ADS this summer. Again, I think there was $750,000 for UI modernization. And I know that there was a $5 million request. I think it was on August 19th. I'm not sure what the status of that is or where that project might be. So that's kind of the CRF stuff. And then, once we've got an update on that, I'd like to turn to, just more broadly where things are with UI modernization. And then the governor's request, your agency's request for $1.2 million for DMV IT modernization. I think that's one-time money. I'd like to hear about that. And then I think there's some information in your presentation on integrated eligibility. That's not necessarily part of this budget process. I think that's more in the capital budget world. But obviously a front burner big project that I think would be helpful to get some visibility on. And again, I think I saw some information on that in the presentation. So again, CRF discussion, things in this budget, which I think is the DMV modernization work, and some update on integrated eligibility were kind of the things that I had on my mind.
Sure. Well, fortunately, we can talk to all those things.
Yeah, that's good.
The ERP project, why you're seeing it now is because the Department of Finance and Management, as well as Department of Human Resources, the governor, all saw an opportunity to use CRF funds for the urgency around being able to help employees work remotely and help management make sure that we're doing all the things that we need to do as managers and make sure that the services get provided. So performance management was one of those things, as well as online applications and evaluations. That project, has been something that we've proposed in the past, and there's never money for it. There's never a good time to do it. The current platform that it sits on, or the current hardware that it sits on, is up for renewal every couple of years, has very little disaster recovery and redundancy built into it, and is on an older version of PeopleSoft, which means that it's not necessarily as secure as we would like it. For those reasons, on the IT side and the business value, we felt that it was a good opportunity to use CRF dollars to replace the system, ensure that we're protecting our data, provide a level of additional, or not additional, but remote working management and performance management that we can't do without it all being manual now, using CRF funds. So it made sense to us. It's something that we're going to have to do. And on the current platform, every 3 or 4 years or 5 years, we spend somewhere between $4 million and $7 million to do an upgrade to the current software platform. Under the new platform, we would move to a platform as a service, and all of that hardware, all of the back end would be updated by another company and kept up to date all the time. So we would stop seeing these huge spikes every 3 or 4 years. They go in the capital bill, and then we pay for the next 10 to 20 years. It just doesn't make sense anymore. And so we're looking to operationalize those costs and build a platform that is more consistent for budgeting purposes and provides better security, more reliability, true disaster recovery, and redundancy. And so that was really that project. And the platform that we would build off from, down the road, we would look to move the finance side of that onto as well. So they're all working on the same platform. We're able to share data in a much easier way than we are now. And it would give us a better look into our enterprise holistically, at our employees, our finances, our budgeting tool, the way we recruit, all of those things. And the modern systems are used across the private enterprise and more across the public enterprise, and have proven to be worth their weight in gold because of the data elements and the modernization aspects of having a system that's always up to date.
So John, I'm going to show off my my ignorance on kind of these this ERP solution project, but is this a discrete project, or is this an initiative that will be stood up and continually added to over the years? Or, is this $5 million a discrete project that can be completed by December 30th, and is presumably reimbursable under CRF because it relates to, the increased remote work demands on state government.
We will be gaining value and using the product by the end of the year. But every day that ticks away, we add a little bit more risk to being able to complete it by then. And that's why it went to JFC last week. This is something where we will continue to use what we pay for. And what I mean by that is there's a bunch of different modules that we can use. We have to buy the whole software package for the $5 million, but we can start to shut down other products that are in our enterprise and move them into the solution that we would already be paying for, which will, reduce costs in other areas and help pay for this solution. When we first looked at this project 3 years ago, well, it's been looked at a few times, but since I've been here, when we looked at it 3 years ago, we had KPMG do a cost analysis of the current solution versus a new solution. And I believe over the life cycle, we were saving over $1 million. So this is, one of those projects that makes a lot of sense to do. We just got to be able to find the money.
Yep. Representative Antachka?
Yeah, I'm going to also display my ignorance about acronyms. And
I apologize.
what you're talking about now is ERP, CRP, what?
ERP,
what
which is
stand for?
Enterprise Resource Planning.
Enterprise Resource Planning. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And I think one of the modules that you currently use is the travel reimbursement. I think you all use that, the VTHR system. This would eventually be a replacement of that as well into a more modern, easier functioning system.
Great. Thank you for that overview and helping me understand what that is. Before we turn to UI, I just wanted to get a quick update for the committee on the $2 million that we appropriated back in June for cybersecurity work. What is that money? How is that process going? Who's doing that work? And just want to hear what the progress is there.
Sure. So I reported to the Joint IT Oversight a couple of weeks ago on this, and I'll tell you the same thing I told them. We are exactly where we expected to be at this time. We are, right within our schedule. The RFP is about to go out, the request for proposal of the different companies that could do this assessment for us. Scott Carby, our Chief Information Security Officer, is putting the finishing touches on that, and then it will go out for proposals to come in, and we'll go through the bidding process. And we have a outline of a schedule that I can send to all of you. It's not in this presentation, but we're right where we expected to be.
Great. Thanks for that. And for the record, I would love to have that schedule, and that's maybe something that we'll post on our website.
Okay.
And maybe even by the time we adjourn at the end of September, we can come back to you just to kind of see how things have progressed in that month, knowing that JITOC will be following this in the off session. Robin, did you have a question?
I do, thanks. John, can you explain briefly, especially in things like where there's a tight time frame, are there some things, does everything have to be an RFP process, or are there some where you just contact the vendor and buy it? And how are those distinctions made?
The way I think about it is, if it's a small piece of work, if it's something that is, under $500,000 and doable in a short time, we usually will go to our retainer list. And that retainer list is a group of IT contractors and vendors that have already signed terms and conditions with the state. And we write a statement of work as far as what we're looking for. We post it for, it can be as little as, 2 days to, 2 weeks. It all depends on, the detail we're looking for, and we receive responses there. And that saves a lot of time off from the old way of, doing an 18-month RFP full proposal for a, small dollar piece of work. The large dollar things that we're doing go to RFP or are sole sourced based on timing. And we try not to do sole sources. We try to be as competitive as possible and make sure we're getting the best prices possible. But there have been times where we know a company can do it. They've done work with us. They may already be on site, and so we've decided to sole source with them. And an example is not coming to mind, but that does happen occasionally.
And is that $500,000 a hard and fast requirement written somewhere, or is that a rule of, a general benchmark on how you operate?
No, that's in our administrative policies. That's
Okay.
in Bulletin 3.5, I believe.
Thanks.
State policy. Yep.
So, John, if we could now turn to some of the UI modernization work and, kind of thinking of this on two levels. One, some of the money that has been directed to this out of CRF in the last couple of months. I think that there was a request to the Joint Fiscal Committee made in July for $750,000. My understanding is that money was directed toward work on record retention and on software integration. There had been some confusion amongst some legislators following this as to whether some of that money was to be used for a request for proposal process about, kind of a full-scale redesign and rebuild of our UI system. So if you could speak to that kind of confusion. And then also, kind of working into some of the bigger questions here, what additional CRF money, perhaps would be put towards our UI system in the coming months? And, big picture, what is the process for pulling together a plan? Who's going to be responsible for pulling together that plan? And, what are the costs of, starting to build, even the plan of how we're going to reconstruct our UI system? So at any rate, want to transition the conversation into those areas.
Sure. I'm going to address the request that we had put in for the 4.5 million for labor originally that didn't make it through. That got stopped in the Senate. And address, I wanted to mention one more thing about the ERP project, the Enterprise Resource Planning that we just left. When we brought that to the JFC, the Joint Fiscal Committee, we did it because it's really hard. 2 weeks can make a big difference in an IT project. And there was a certain amount of urgency around getting that project started. The JFC thought it would be best if it went through the legislative process. So I just wanted to kind of highlight for all of you, every day we lose on that, as long as the 12/31 deadline stays in place, we're adding risk to the overall project timeline on whether or not we can complete by that date. So with that said, I'll move on to the UI project. The original $4.5 million request, there was a lot of work put into that by ADS and the Department of Labor. We looked at all the different modules that really attach to the core component of UI, unemployment insurance, and using a platform that ADS has selected as one of the statewide enterprise platforms, which is Salesforce. We started doing work. We built PUA off that platform, as well as other things to help the Department of Labor get checks out. Given the timeline at that point, we felt that there were, X number of modules that we could do by the end of the year. We worked with Salesforce and vendors to put together cost proposals, and we presented that. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the process. Now, or in June, when we went back to the legislature and asked for $750,000, those were the things that we felt that we could implement by the end of the year. And with the lower price tag, the committee decided to fund those things, and that's for a product called MuleSoft. And MuleSoft, the simplest way of thinking about it is it's really the connector between the old mainframe and our new Salesforce system. It ties the two together so we can share data and pass data in an easier way. I think that's the easiest way to explain that piece. And then the rest of the funds were for another enterprise platform that ADS has chosen for the enterprise, and that's OnBase. And OnBase is a document management system. When you go over to the Department of Labor, or when you call the Department of Labor, you would not believe how much, well, you may, how much of their process is manual and paper driven. This OnBase system would not only scan their files into their system and make them searchable, but it would give them a long-term document management solution that will work with whatever path we go down towards replacing that core UI component. I'm going to introduce Stacy Gibson Granfield, who's our Enterprise Project Management Director. And she's been tightly involved in this project. Normally, I would have my deputy talk about it because he's spent the past 6 months over at Labor helping Commissioner Harrington through decision making and building plans. But he's taking a well-needed, well-deserved vacation and is out of state. So at his camp in New Hampshire. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy. And Stacy, tell me what slide you'd like me on, and I will be the driver for you.
I think if you just start at the first one for UI, that'll be good. So next slide after that one. There you go.
All right.
Good morning,
Do you want
everyone.
to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yep. My name is Stacy Gibson Granfield. I am the director of the Enterprise Project Management Office. I've been with the state of Vermont for 28 years. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. You don't need my whole resume. So first time
Thank
I've
you for
actually,
joining us, Stacy. Thank
thank you for having me. And this is the first time I've actually been in this seat with the legislature. I've attended hearings in the past as a support person, but not actually presenting. So bear with me if I seem a little nervous.
You're doing great.
Okay. So this slide here really speaks to what the current state of the unemployment insurance system is as of basically today. We completed a mainframe migration during the pandemic, which basically moved the operating system under the responsibility of a vendor that we contract with named Blue Hill. That migration was completed June 13th. And we're currently in the process of planning for an operating system upgrade. What this basically means is we've hired a vendor to help us maintain the mainframe. They have staff who have the necessary skills in COBOL programming, if you will, to support issues with it and keep it up and running and keep it secured while we figure out what our path forward is. So they have more resources, more capacity, and the operating system upgrade that's being planned is it's like if you get an upgrade to Microsoft on your computer, it's the same type of thing, just on a bigger scale. So they will be doing that upgrade, and we're assisting them, just trying to keep them organized and on schedule. The consortium effort that the state of Vermont was engaged in with the state of Idaho and North Dakota, that consortium I believe has been completely dissolved, but it was at least in dissolution discussions with the attorney generals from each state in February, right before the pandemic. In January, the governors of the 3 states agreed to dissolve the consortium based on the fact that it just wasn't going well. And some of the core issues there were, it's really difficult to engage in a contractual relationship with other states. And the state of Idaho was doing the development software, and we just kept running into fundamental, foundational issues where we couldn't resolve them. And North Dakota experienced the same thing. So all three states just realized after a couple of years of trying to make this work that it wasn't getting us where we needed to be, and it was time to separate and move on. So we dissolved the consortium. Since then, we have kept discussions open with the state of North Dakota on any potential future collaboration opportunities. The biggest hurdle there for these two states to continue to collaborate is the differences in how our current mainframes operate. One is on what they call a Unisys operating system. The other one is on a Microsoft or an IBM operating system. And so we have a lot of differences in how we currently manage our system and the data and the applications that sit on within them. So for us to actually collaborate together, we would have to look at a new solution that's not related to the mainframes that currently exist. In addition, because of the pandemic, both states have had to go in completely different directions in how they solve for some of the immediate pain related to issuing unemployment claims. So like Vermont, North Dakota face similar challenges with the volume of unemployment claims coming in and the fact that they were still operating on an old mainframe system that was giving them challenges. But we continue to meet on a fairly regular basis. We try to meet weekly. That doesn't always happen because of other priorities. And I believe at the leadership level for each state within the business side, they have also been having some conversations at the federal level. But nothing really strategic has come out of those yet, other than let us know what direction you're going in. We'll let you know what direction we're going in, and we'll see if there are places where we can meet together and maybe do something collaboratively. The current state of the UI system that was delivered by Idaho is the last little bit of this slide. So part of IUS is building a core code, a core system, which is what Idaho is building, and then state-specific modules, which are things specific to each state that you wouldn't ask another state to build. So for example, in the state of Vermont, we would have a state-specific module related to our tax laws. And so we would build a module that would specifically address our state's tax regulations, whereas Idaho was just going to build the larger core component. Our state-specific modules are 65 to 80% complete. And in the IUS core code, which is like the foundation, if you will, there are 610 bugs unresolved, and they had not been able to deliver tax or benefits functionality at the time that we dissolved the consortium. So if we were to explore that as an alternative, there is still a lot of work that would need to be done, and frankly, a lot of rework. With the bugs that are unresolved, much of that is because of the way IUS addressed changing requirements. So they may have built things a certain way when it was just Idaho and Vermont, and then when North Dakota came on, they pivoted to try to meet some of North Dakota's requirements, and in doing so, changed how they had built it for Vermont, which then caused problems for how our system was being built. So there was there's a lot of unresolved work there as far as the existing IUS core code. I think you're on mute, Secretary Quinn.
I just want to jump in quickly and say that, while it looks like the majority of the way complete, I am 100% against continuing with this system. One, and I've been saying this for years, and we've tried to make it work. And, we finally got to that point where we're like, we know it's not going to. We don't have the people to support the system once it is built. If we were to hire someone, it's still built in a way that the state of Vermont is never going to be able to support it. And it's going to quickly fall to old software revisions where we don't dare touch the system because something might break. I think the US DOL had great intentions of, everyone kind of joining together in separate groups and building something. But I think as Stacy will tell you and others will tell you, only one of them has worked over the past 10 years and they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And the other one only worked because they just kept going and refused to say it was going to fail. And then eventually they got something, but at a huge, huge cost. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'll let Stacy continue.
Actually, I want to chime in here, John and Stacy, and I think there's another couple of questions in the queue. I want to play this back to you and be clear that what I'm hearing is that the path forward for Vermont in modernizing its UI system is unilateral action. It is not a consortium. Is that correct?
I would say yes.
Okay. When are we going to stick a fork in this if we haven't already?
I would say we have stuck a fork in it, although I think on the business side and at the federal level, there's still like a last minute desire to try to do something collaboratively, but I don't see
Yeah.
a lot of hope coming out of that.
And I would say that the business side is trying to be very cautious and walk a, tightrope to make sure that no funding gets clawed back and our federal partners understand that we've, explored this to the nth degree and it's not working and that we need to do something different. So I think our business side is really, trying to appease the federal side of this, strange triangle.
So my second question, which is really two questions, and Stacy, I think it starts to get into your next slide, so I'll lead the witness here. But if I go on the assumption that we are going to move forward in a unilateral way, what is the process by which we come up with a plan to create our modern UI system? So what will be that process and the timing of that? And then secondly, and maybe more relevant to kind of current things, is the work that we're doing right now with CRF funding complementary to the work that we'll be doing in the future? Or is this kind of one-time work to try and keep our system functioning, but we're going to ultimately, kind of move on to something else?
Yep.
So, if you want to answer those as you're moving into this, that's great. Or if those are things that,
Yep. Well, I
help us
think you're absolutely right. This slide gets to addressing all of that. So let's just go forward, and Secretary Quinn can chime in if he wants to add anything. He's better at describing MuleSoft integration than I am. So, so what you see on this slide is the next steps to modernization. These are all necessary steps to getting us to a fully modernized system. The MuleSoft integration, as he described earlier, allows us to integrate with the mainframe and other systems, but also as we're building the new system, it brings that integration capability to us as well, which is going to be really important when we get to the slide that shows the roadmap, right? So I'll kind of dig into that a little bit more, but suffice it to say, as we're building out a new system, we will need to be able to also operate on the mainframe until the new system is complete. So having MuleSoft in place will allow us to exchange data as we're building our new flight deck and retiring the old one. On-base integration is, again, another component of UI modernization, where as we're building out the new UI system, being able to adapt a workflow that, if you will, that would allow us to share documents between the UI system and other staff. That's where on-base comes in, not just to store documents, but also to potentially use it in the sharing of documents across applications. So for example, if I'm in the benefits unit in the Department of Labor and I need to share an application with the people working in the tax unit at the Department of Labor, I'll be able to do that via on-base rather than print off a stack of papers, walk across the other side of the building and hand it to my colleague or whatever mechanism that they currently use. So that's where OnBase comes in. It helps us to be able to share documentation across the platform more easily. The RFI and RFP for UI modernization is what's going to really answer most of the questions that I think you all have, which is around cost and timing. So the intent of it is to take the roadmap, the plan that we've developed, and put it out to the vendor community and say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. What would your proposed solution cost? How much time would it take to build? How would you meet the needs that we're putting out there? And what we're trying to do is come up with a plan that is modular, meaning it's not one big system that we're building that's going to take a year to do. It's how can we take UI, break it down into component pieces and parts, deliver it in a way that you are seeing a minimum viable product being delivered routinely over time. And that could be weeks and months, depending on the proposals that we receive. I'll talk just a little bit about process, and then I'll share the roadmap, which I think will help make this more clear. So the process we're engaged in currently is we are documenting all of our requirements, business and technical, putting together that RFI with the hope to post it in September. We expect to get results back and then plan for an RFP as a result of the RFI. So what the RFI will do is it'll tell us this is about how much each of these phases or modulars will cost. If those costs are aligned with expectations from the Vermont Department of Labor, the Agency of Digital Services, the Joint Fiscal Committee, the legislature, as far as spending goes, then we would move into the RFP phase, which would basically allow us to either post to the vendor community, depending on if we're above or under that 500K threshold that Secretary Quinn alluded to earlier. If we were under for any of these, we would look to post an RFP to the retainer list. Our intent as well is to look for information and proposals that would allow this system to be built on our existing Salesforce platform. That doesn't mean that Salesforce is the be all end all, but it does ask vendors to consider that in their proposal. And I can tell you from my experience on a couple of other RFIs that we've posted recently, there are quite a few vendors out there that do that do have the capability to build on the Salesforce platform. I'll just, within the Agency of Education and RFI we put out a year ago, we had 11 responses, 7 of them were on Salesforce. So there is a competitiveness out there. That doesn't mean that it's one vendor that we would necessarily always be doing business with. The platform is one thing, the vendor community is much broader.
Well, and I would just add quickly that, you know, we're not going to fit a square peg into a round hole, and that the platform that we chose is one of our enterprise platforms. And by using those, we reduce the number of employees it takes to manage those. We have a higher level of expertise in those platforms rather than us, you know, going down the path of adding to the 1,400 applications that we already have. We're choosing platforms that we can really build our skill sets and build a workforce around. And so it makes perfect sense to us to use the Salesforce platform where we can. But if there's pieces that don't work in the Salesforce platform, we're not going to jam it in. We've picked integration tools that allow us to connect to it and still share the data and do things as one integrated system.
So thank you. That was very helpful. Just to kind of get a time check here, it's 11:25. John and Stacy, I want to check before we go too much more granularly into the UI stuff. I'm not sure if we need to, quite frankly, because we've got a couple of other topics I want to discuss with you. But as you think about that, there's a couple of questions that I want to refer to. So Robin, I see you have a question, and Mike, go ahead, Robin.
Thank you. It's actually a couple of questions, which I hope are quick. The first, and I don't know whether they're for John or for Stacy, whoever's so moved to answer. The first one is there anything of value to be salvaged from the collaboration process that we were in for a while, or is that just kind of a write-off at this point?
So I would say that as we learn more about what's available to us in this RFI, RFP process, we will certainly look at the state-specific modules that we referenced earlier to see if any of those are worth entertaining as well. There is a possibility that some of the work that our team did internally as part of UI may be able to be part of this, but that'll be dependent on what we get for proposals.
Thank you. The next question also, I hope, is a quick one. You were talking about OnBase as an integrating software. And the Secretary of State's business platform recently came up with their one-stop shopping, integrating between different agencies and departments. And I know Secretary of State has its own independent IT department, but is it the same software? I mean, is this a statewide integration or the potential for statewide integration, or is it still siloed?
Yes, building on our Salesforce platform would be the business portal. And again, that's why, you know, we're choosing some of these platforms is we get tighter integration among all of these things. You know, eventually, you know, we'll be able to connect permitting with the one-stop portal, and you'll be able to, you know, pick up all your permits and have one shopping cart and do all of those things. And it makes it much easier if we build on the same platform. So the short answer, yes.
Great. And then the last one is back in the summer, early summer, I attended a presentation from the state of Rhode Island who was talking about their UI response and the nimbleness, the responsiveness, and they were saying, and to be fair, I understood about 10% of it, but they were talking about that it was all enabled by having a cloud-based system. And I'm wondering, is that what we're looking at? Or are we looking at a different mainframe-based system?
In my view, and where I want the roadmap to show is that we're headed for that cloud-based system. No more of the, you know, we're going to try to support it. We're going to try to build it on our own. It does not work for the state, and we've proven it time and time again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would concur that the Department of Labor is on the same page with that as well.
Go ahead, Mike. Did you have a question?
Yeah, on the same Rhode Island question there, did you look at that, see what they did and how they were able to get that up and running so quickly? John?
So I honestly was not aware that Rhode Island had stood something up in the last 6 months, but I'm not always privy to some of those external conversations, Representative. I would have to look back at that. We have talked about what other states have been doing, but nothing that we've looked at as far as our roadmap.
Okay. Also, I was wondering, you're using Salesforce as a platform, and I'm wondering what programming language that is utilizing, and how does that compare with the IUS system and the programming language there, and are they compatible that would help you transition some modules from IUS to Salesforce?
So Salesforce is a low code system. So I think of it a lot like, and maybe this is the wrong way to think of it, but it's really almost like a drag and drop, very little code needed. And so the MuleSoft tool helps us integrate between that old platform and the Salesforce system. So yes, they will talk using that MuleSoft tool. And that's why we need the MuleSoft tool. And us spending that money now doesn't necessarily hurt us in any way in the future. It only gives us greater options, in my opinion. But low code, it's the way to go. And I think we have a slide here, but I think it's worth mentioning. We've stood up 15 different applications for the COVID response in the past 5.5 months. That's incredible when you think about, you know, a regular, you know, how long would we have taken to stand up PUA in a normal process? It would be 2 years. Average stand-up time is somewhere between, you know, 10 10 and 14 days for to get the product live. I think it's an incredible, easy way to move our state forward and modernize in a quick way.
So Secretary and Stacy, before we move away from UI, and I see Representative Sebilia's got her hand up, I'll call on you just a second. I don't want to forget to thank you and all your staff for the extraordinary work that you've done on the UI system in the last, I guess it's been 5 months. As every state representative knows, this was a huge issue in March, April, May. And I know that you and your staff did, kind of extraordinary work, you did do extraordinary work in, just standing that system up. And I think, that work continues today with great positive benefit. Certainly the questions I've gotten from constituents about UI system have gone from, literally dozens, if not scores, to a trickle. And I think that is largely because of your work. So thank you for that. Representative Sibilia, I wanted to make sure you got in the question here.
Thank you. I just wanted to double check. I think Secretary Quinn, I heard you say 50, you stood up 15 different.
Yep.
Yes, 15.
And I know we have a lot to hear from today. Do you have a list of those, or could we see a list of those at some point?
Yeah, there's a list here.
Okay.
I think it includes all of them. I'm not sure. We put this together last night, knowing that
Great.
Salesforce would be.
Thank you.
But just to be clear, Secretary, the last page of your presentation is the list of those applications?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. I would, again, just keeping an eye on the clock and knowing all we've got to cover today, I would like to pivot our discussion to very specifically the DMV budget request that's part of the new budget that's come out in the last couple of weeks for the last 3 quarters of FY21. My understanding is that the governor has a request for $1.2 million of one-time money for a DMV project that I believe involves stickering, and I'm not sure what that is, but I'd like to hear more about that project, what the timing of it is, what the scope plan, and frankly, what the urgency is of it. There's extraordinary competition in the budget for one-time money, a huge amount of demand for that one-time money, and it's certainly oversubscribed. So again, Secretary, I'm not sure if it's you or someone else on your staff who could speak to that DMV IT modernization request.
So can you all see the window I'm sharing now?
Can you move the option, or optimize the screen again there, please?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure I have the right thing up here. So this was put together by Tony Fakos and Wanda Manoli. This presentation on on-demand stickering and inspections. And this has been something that's been worked on with between ADS and what was DII and the Department of Motor Vehicles. This has been a long-term goal to do this project, and the money keeps getting taken back away from them. There's a lot of support for this and a lot of efficiencies to be gained from this program, and it's really amazing when I talked to Commissioner Manoli and talked about what even the current state is and the process that we go through to print inspection stickers for vehicles, with mail and staffing time and sticker printing, and the amount that goes to waste from that, and the multiple lines of support that we think of when that we probably don't think of, but DMV recognizes. One of the interesting things about it is DMV supports over 1,100 different inspection stations across Vermont. Last year, as an example, 6,000 stickers didn't come back, which leads you to believe, there's a number of reasons for that, but in that is inspection fraud. There's a black market out there for people that, are willing to buy an inspection sticker. Those things have caused issues with staffing at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Specifically, each time a sticker doesn't come back, an officer has to go out and respond to that inspection station and understand why. It's a lot of staff time. And so the future state is really to not increase fees, not increase our costs, but to use this, estimated 1.2 million to fund moving this function over to Parsons, our vendor that provides other system functions already. This is, I can't tell you, in my own words, it'd be great to have the DMV here today to talk about all the programmatic things, but even on the IT side, the amount or the legacy system that this runs on and the way we do it is just doesn't make sense to do it. And I understand it is a lot of money, but this brings not only long-term benefit to Vermonters, but even now in the COVID crisis, I think it adds additional benefit there as well. And as you can see on the screen, I'm not going directly from the screen, but you can see the number of benefits here for Vermonters.
Yeah, I don't see that screen as Representative Higley. I'm not sure if everybody else does, but I guess I don't see the screen you're talking about, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you guys were can you see this net? Hold on here. Let me.
I see your screen, but it's showing a DOL slide, not DMV.
Let me fix that. I apologize.
I thought you were just riffing.
Well, I was for the most part, but I popped up the slides and, as you can see, elimination of escrow account for stickers. There's a long list here of things that are benefits to the Vermont businesses.
Got it now. Thanks.
Yep. And really, when we put this together, in my conversations with the governor, we do I think a very decent job of collaborating across the agencies, ADS being in the middle of almost all of those things to make sure that whatever we do has long-term benefit and puts us on a sustainable path and builds in additional efficiency and hopefully drives down costs over time to the Department of Labor and in return the Vermont citizens. And some of that's through avoidance by not having to raise additional fees.
Secretary, is this a project that has already been planned and scoped and is ready to pull off the shelf and go? Or is this, okay, if we get the $1.2 million of funding, then it's time to start planning and figuring out how we're going to do this?
So we are working with Parsons now to, tighten up exactly what's in scope. So I would say we're in planning now. It's not something where we execute the contract tomorrow, but we are working through those contract details and exactly what's in scope, what's out of scope, what the timing looks like, how we transition this program over to the vendor in a way that is not only effective and efficient, but is really seamless to the Vermont business and seamless to the Vermonter.
And so this might be part of that discussion right now, but is your sense that this is the kind of project that is planned and scoped in FY21 and completed and is out and serving Vermonters in FY22? Or is this more like a 5-year project? Is this a 1-year? Give me a sense as to what the scale is here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we will be underway in 21. Whether or not we'll wrap up in 21, we're still working out those details. And you know, the hesitation you hear in my voice is really around the COVID response and what happens this winter, and you know those type of things that I'm trying to take into account, saying if things get bad, what's going to happen to our project. So there is definitely potential for it to go into 22, but our intention is to get a contract signed right away. And when I say contract signed, it's really an amendment to the contract because we already have a contract with this company. So that speeds things up a little bit.
Thank you. Representative Chase and then Representative Yantachka.
Yes, sir. So, John, I was wondering, as we're talking about some of these digital things, what about the idea of eschewing stickers entirely? So if we had a digital record of the vehicle inspections, how connected are the enforcement officers around the state that they could just pull it up on demand, and you couldn't have a fake sticker even if you were a really good copier?
Right. I would have to defer that to the enforcement division. I just don't have that level of detail for you, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't want to misdirect you by answering it incorrectly.
Fair enough.
I would say that this is one of those projects that is in the best interest of all of us to do. I think DMV is one of those older legacy technology departments, and I think Commissioner Manoli has made great strides there, but this will only help the Vermont citizens even more and make it a little bit more efficient and keep those DMV costs down. And I think the one other question that I wanted to mention that I think is important, we're still scoping, as I mentioned, and the estimated is 1.2 million, but the governor put this in our budget rather than the DMV budget. There was a little question around there and a little snafu in the budget, book around where the money lies. The governor put it in our budget because, if we get it down to 1.15 million or 1.1 or 1 million even, which I think may be a little far, but if we do get it down there, we have a list of prioritization of efficiency projects that we can do that would directly benefit citizens. And so we keep a list of those things. And so to lower the bureaucracy across during, trying to shift money across to making sure that if there's extra, it doesn't get eaten up in regular program costs. The governor put it in our budget to make sure that we were maximizing the efficiency dollars and modernizing as much as possible.
Representative.
Yeah, thanks, John. This appears to be a different slide presentation than what we have listed on our committee website, and I wonder if you could also supply this.
Well, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
I apologize for that. The DMV sent this to me yesterday, and I didn't catch it until late last night and forgot to send it on, but I will absolutely send it on.
Great. Representative Feltus, did you have a question? I saw your hand up and I wanted to make sure if you did.
Same question as Mike. I would like to see the slide deck, please.
Okay, great. So if we can get that and maybe have Danielle post it to our site for today, that'd be great.
Okay.
Representative Sibilia and then Representative Higley. Go ahead, Laura.
Yep. Secretary Quinn, can you just walk me through again why it's in your budget? I don't understand. So it's in your budget to maximize the efficiencies?
To maximize modernization of technology. And let me explain. And I think Kate touched on this a little bit around demand costs. And when we're not fully done a scope, we estimate the best we can at what something will cost. And usually that number can be a little on the high side to make sure we don't come back to you and say, yeah, we're 200 grand short, because that usually doesn't go over well for us. The governor and I, as well as Commissioner Manoli talked about this and said, our best guess is, probably just a tiny bit on the high side. It's about $1.2 million, but if there's any additional money left over, the governor felt strongly about trying to modernize technology as much as possible. And by it being in ADS's budget, any leftover dollars we could put specifically towards a modernization project that was going on to make sure that we're maximizing, our investment in that area, and it doesn't just get absorbed into a program cost.
Mr. Chair, may I just follow up really briefly?
Please.
So that's helpful, Secretary Quinn. How many, so I'm just thinking about, maybe this is a shift in how we've done things. Typically, where do we find these types of, in the past, we would have found these types of expenses within the department or agency, right? Or would they have in the past also run through your agency?
It depends. Sometimes it makes sense to keep it in the agency. But, there are times where it's in our budget as well. So there's not I would say 100% consistent way at this point. And some of it goes to the type of IT contracts there are. And when they're super heavy on the business side and it would just really be a pass through and we have the numbers dialed in, we leave it on the business side sometimes. But in this case, it made sense to put it in our budget for the reasons I outlined.
Okay, and then just one, what was the last kind of large IT project that came through ADS as opposed to department or an agency?
Well, I would shift to talk specifically about licensing as an example, rather than because we're talking about a Salesforce platform, for example. We could have left that so each agency was doing buying their own licenses as we go. We went out and bought all the licenses that we needed because it would drive down the overall cost. Plus, when you're talking with vendors are pretty smart about where items live. And, it hides a little bit of the cost of what we actually have if it sits in our budget rather than DMV's, and I'm not saying that this vendor would do this, but, if they see we have 1.2, the estimate may come in directly at 1.2. Whereas if they're not quite sure, they're going to give us our most, competitive price possible. That's my feeling.
Now I'm super intrigued, Mr. Chair. So I promise this will be my last question and I'll move on and follow later. But just is there a policy? Is there a decision-making process or policy that you look at when you make the decision about which budget it goes in? Because what I'm hearing is if it's really deep in the business itself, very specific to the business, you're probably more likely to see it in that budget. Whereas if there's greater applicability or use of technology that's being used across the whole enterprise, it may end up in ADS. Am I hearing that correctly? And then is there some sort of a decision-making process that helps decide, or is that really a subjective kind of thing?
There's not a policy around it. What I would say is the description you gave is pretty close to accurate. And for me, it wasn't, I wasn't, going to fall on my sword about where the money lived. It wasn't a big deal to me. It was more about, if there is any leftover dollars, it's much easier for us to appropriate or use those dollars for a additional modernization of something.
Okay. Thank you.
Just with a quick budget process, that we're all under, right? And the number of budgets that we're doing in a 6-month period, these decisions come down to, the last few days. And we wanted to make sure we were maximizing those dollars.
Representative Higley.
Yeah, John, you may not have been involved in this, but seems like the number 2 calls that I've been getting from constituents is regarding to DMV and registrations and so on. And I know that they just came out having a new policy or new IT project where you can call in or, email in, I believe, or whatever, for a copy of a registration you can stick in your back window pretty much instantly. Were you involved in that? And is that really up and running or will be here?
I'm not sure about that specific project. I will tell you that they just went online with a new appointment program this week, and that we were right in the middle of that, helping DMV stand it up. Anything technology-wise over there, we assist them with. They're really good partners. They make sure that we're right in the middle of it to make and help with the decision making around technology. And their online appointment process, if you haven't tried it and you need something done where you feel more comfortable going into the DMV, it's up and running. I signed up. I have an appointment on Monday morning. I have a couple new registrations that I need to do that don't seem very straightforward, so I'm going to go in. But as far as the registration reprint, I'm not sure on that one.
Okay, thanks.
Scott, did you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to go back to Representative Chase's comment about why we need stickers. It seems to me that if we're trying to move into an era of new technology, that's a conversation to have, rather than sort of automatically spending $1 point whatever million to upgrade our sticker program. Let's talk about it. Is there a better way to do this? So that would be my feeling about it.
Yeah, I would say, I think, I hear your comment, and I think it's all appropriate. We deal with a company called Parsons, who's really, cutting edge in a lot of these areas. We talk with a lot of other states about what they're doing. I have someone assigned to the Agency of Transportation / DMV full-time that reports, directly back to me. And they, before COVID, they would go to these conferences and ask those questions, what is the best way? What's the most new and up and coming way? And right now for Vermont, this is the best, most appropriate way that Parsons and our IT lead, as well as the DMV, felt comfortable with.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not feeling comfortable with it. So I'd like to have, I don't know whether this is the appropriate venue, but at some point have that conversation.
Sure.
Well, and Scott and Seth, I'm going to touch base with the leadership on the Transportation Committee and at least refer them to this portion of our testimony this morning, if this helps them, from a policy or budget recommendation standpoint. So maybe there's something to footnote here. If you both want to tie into the Transportation Committee and some of the work that they're doing there from a programmatic perspective. Secretary Quinn and team, I want to thank you for joining. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Feltus.
Thank you. Just one last question, and I've asked John, and it may be in this deck that I'll look at later. Obviously, from the appropriations point of view, and as Chair Briglin pointed out, there's a lot of competition for this one-time money. The question that I would just ask you to reply to me at a later time, perhaps, is this a project that could be practically spread over 2 years, reduce our expenditure this year, so we do part this year, part next year, or does indeed it just need to be done all at once? And can it be done all at once in a reasonably compact time span? Or can we spread it out and spend our money in different ways, some this year and some next year, but still get the project done? So that's a comment I would like from you, either offline or if it's in this deck, I'll look at that too. Thanks.
Yes, and I will CC Chairman Briglin when I send that to you, Representative Feltus.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Secretary Quinn, thank you and your team for joining us today. This was helpful to me, hopefully to committee members as well, along with Representative Feltus and Dan Smith. I am going to take the chairman's prerogative to short circuit this conversation. I would love to spend some time on integrated eligibility we're going to have to table that for a future time. I would refer members to page 17 in the slide deck, where there is a page that at least goes through some updating on that. And again, it's something that we'll have to come back to at a future date. But thank you again, John, for joining us this morning, and thank you, Stacy. That was very helpful. I want to now turn for our next 2 hours of work to the Department of Public Service. And I believe Commissioner Tierney and Director Purvis are here. You're not on my Brady Bunch screen, but I know you're out there somewhere.
We are indeed.
Okay, there you are. Okay. We've been covering a lot of budget things this morning, and plenty to cover with you all as well. June, I had the advantage of talking to you prior to this hearing this morning, again, just to kind of brainstorm on some of the things that we want to cover at a very high level. I'm hoping the committee can get updates on a few things this morning, as well as cover some of the things in the FY21 budget requests that are before the Appropriations Committee. We've done quite a bit of work with you and Clay and your respective teams back in May and June on things that were incorporated into H966 in terms of connectivity initiative dollars, CUD planning dollars, telecom planning dollars. I think there's some PEG money in there, as well as arrearages. And to the extent that you can give us some updates on that, that would be helpful, I think, to the committee, and folks may have questions on that. And then kind of the second kind of chunk of topics, if you will, relate to the FY21 budget requests. There's a $2 million request in there for some CUD support funding, as well as there's a small amount of funding for Wi-Fi hotspots. And then I just want to touch on some telecom planning questions. So those are kind of my top of mind things. Again, kind of in two chunks: our CRF kind of historic work and update on that, and then kind of looking forward and the work that Representative Feltus and the Appropriations Committee are doing, and any way that we might be able to help in terms of supporting or offering some of our informational expertise on that. So welcome, June. Thanks for joining us. And
of course, my pleasure.
Clay as well.
So yeah, we do have a lot to get through, and we also have to be in Senate Finance at 1:30. So I will do my level best here. Turning first to the CRF update. Chair Briglin, I believe I sent to you around August 18 a detailed memo that was required pursuant to H966 that lays out where we were as of that date. And so if your members would care to have a look at that, if they don't feel they get enough detail today, I would recommend that as great reading. It'll put you to sleep if nothing else.
No, it's great information. And if that had not gone to our committee assistant for distribution, I will make sure that's done today, and I apologize to members in advance if I dropped the ball on that. But yes, I did look.
Just bringing it up as a way to say, if you want greater detail for the ground we covered today, that memo is a good way to get it. But going down it real quick, your first request was to hear about the connectivity initiative. I think that's the grant program where we have $12 million set aside to build discrete projects that will enhance connectivity throughout the state. The first tranche of $4 million was awarded last week. We are now actively in discussions to finalize those grants. There are, I will tell you, some hiccups, as was fully expected. These hiccups have to do with address verification and the like, and also more granular reactions and details that are coming out as to what the impact of this project or that project might be on another stakeholder, such as a CUD. What I would like to give the committee is a sense that the discussion is fulsome, the dialogue is good, And the efforts toward finding common ground where there are hiccups is, in my opinion, healthy. So we can't expect to do all this without breaking a little bit of glass, but there will be, some broken along the way. But I don't think it's anything that should be of concern to this committee. I think the bigger picture is that we are succeeding in getting projects out in a diversity of areas in the state. We have 2 more tranches to finish processing. One of them, unfortunately, the second tranche of $4 million, the scoring has been delayed because the providers, when they gave us their proposals, didn't do perhaps what we might have hoped they would have done by way of address verification. So we've been having to do some vetting there to make sure that we're not awarding dollars twice, or that we're not awarding dollars for addresses that already have connectivity, that sort of thing. These are administrative hiccups that we expected and we're working through. Turning to the Consumer Assistance Line Extension Program, that program launched toward the end of July. As of this date, we have 163 applications. We have approved 39 for a value of $80,000. This program is picking up momentum, so I expect that we will see more approvals in very short order. An interesting thing about this program is that when we were conceptualizing this last spring, we had the Connectivity Initiative program, loosely speaking, for system expansion projects, if you will. And then we had the line extension program that was, I think, aimed at individual extensions here and there. And what has happened within that line extension program, for instance, yesterday, is there was a group of 13 neighbors in Waterbury who got together and were able to aggregate their extensions, so that you have sort of a middle ground between the Connectivity Initiative program and the one offline extension program. And I think that's a good thing, because it shows that these dollars are being used to good effect, and they're having a magnifying or an amplifying effect by covering an entire area, not just one household. The line extension program has been a little challenging in that what we're discovering is that carriers are making decisions about whether to put their resources toward the Connectivity Initiative or toward line extensions. And so consumers are getting differing responses depending on whether they're in consolidated service territory, for instance, or in Waitsfield service territory and the like. I think the members of this committee will understand that we are talking about broadband service, so we can't compel participation by these carriers in the line extension program. I'm told that Consolidated has, generally speaking, opted not to participate in the consumer line extension program. They will deal with the one-off here and there, but that's been their judgment that this is not a program that they can productively participate in. We do continue to have conversations with them and with Comcast and Waitsfield Champlain and EC Fiber and Charter to make sure that that we're not talking past each other about these programs. One significant breakthrough this week, for instance, was that EC Fiber has gotten to a place where it sees that it too can productively participate in the line extension program, in addition to the Connectivity Initiative program. Turning next to the temporary Lifeline program, that's a basic $20 per month subsidy that we have launched as a program for folks who are struggling to afford broadband. Great if you can get your connection now, but what does it serve you if you can't afford to pay for it? So that's a subsidy that we've put out there. We have not fully pushed the advertisement of that program, because we're taking care to stand these programs up so that when the subscription starts, meaning when word is blanketed out there through a marketing push, the program is actually able and ready to deliver on that. So stay tuned on it. Turning next to the Community Resiliency Program, that's the $800,000 that were set aside for the CUDs for planning purposes for resiliency. I'm pleased to report that as we sit here today, 5 of the 6 awards that we're making so far have been finalized in terms of their paperwork, but there is a snag we're running into, namely insurance. The CUDs have had a very difficult time securing the requisite insurance for this program. We have explored getting them a waiver. It's a state-based requirement. We've also been exploring finding policies that are out there to help them. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer yet today to be able to tell you that we have put a fork in that, but we are certainly not sparing any effort to get to yes there. Turning next to PEG access, that's the $466,500 that were allocated to help with their activities during the COVID emergency. I received a very helpful update from Lauren Glendavidian from Vermont Access Network yesterday. I meant to share it with the committee and just did not get to it, but we'll do so as soon as we are done. But what those folks have been doing is, I think, commendable and very helpful to Vermonters as they weather the pandemic. Per Ms. Davidian's email yesterday, they are about to send me an invoice for about 58% of this allocation to cover what they've been doing so far. And as I understand it, it is, among other things, involved providing timely emergency management updates, supporting live remote municipal meetings, as well as supporting educational programs for Vermonters of all ages, supporting graduation ceremonies, election forums, religious services, and providing reliable fora for the expression of what are important ideas and community solutions. So really, when you think about how the public square has been impaired for so many people in the state who lack good connectivity, PEG through television has been able to step in the breach and help with a lot of that. And as I said, I think it's commendable work. I think, Chair Briglin, you also wanted to hear a little bit about the ratepayer arrearages program, or did you want to table that for another day?
I would like to hear about that. And before we kind of turn to that kind of section of the energy world, if you will,
Yes.
kind of stay in the telecom world, there's a couple hands up. A question that I want to ask, which I think I know the answer to, but it's something I very much want to get on the record, which is with regard to the connectivity initiative grants. One round has gone out, two more are in the offing. The dollars for those grants, I believe, are not going to actually be paid out until it's confirmed that the projects are completed as they were designed and actually meet the speed requirements, for example, and I think some other requirements. But I just wanted to be clear with you, yes, or give you the opportunity to comment on that there's an accountability mechanism
There is.
with all those projects.
There is, and I felt that was essential because, as many of you know, some of these grants are going to an entity that has had a controversial regulatory past in the state, VTEL. I want to be clear that as a regulator, I take an evidence-based approach to making judgment calls, such as awarding grants or pursuing enforcement actions and the like. And so I want to give the committee assurance that very careful thought was given to making these grants. And one of the absolute essentials was for us to be able to assure the public that the thing that proved so disturbing in the past with the ARA funding would not be replicated, at least where the state is administering these funds directly. So that's why we put the accountability requirement in there, which I regard to be essential, that the money doesn't get paid out until the speed representation that was made in the grant application, in fact, is verified. Sure. So I think you can have some comfort there. I do want to highlight one footnote that I would ask Clay to confirm if I say something wrong, Clay, you should chime in. But as you know, there is one project in the Northeast Kingdom dealing with the Kingdom East School District that was put together with Cloud Alliance and Velco and other players, which is to me a very important project because it stands to be a real game changer for a significant number of students there. And last I understood, there might be some issue for that particular project with having to wait for funding until the end of the project. That may be a project where they will need to have some of the funding up front in order to be able to build. Clay, did I get that right, or is my information outdated?
No, June, thank you. I think that's correct. There are a couple carriers that did notify us that they would need some amount of funding in advance, including some of the fiber providers. And we've said that we'll work with carriers on a case-by-case basis, and ensure that there are protections in place. I think the carrier that's high on everybody's mind, though, has not asked for that.
Yeah, thank you, Clay. So I'll put the fine point on it and say, to our knowledge, VTEL hasn't asked for that. And I think it's pretty clear that in that case-by-case situation, I'm afraid we don't have a margin for advancing funds to VTEL, precisely because of the controversial past.
Yep.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that clarification. And again, I did want to make sure that was stated publicly. We've got 4 hands up in the queue. Representative Sibilia, Representative Yantachka, Representative Campbell, and Representative Chestnut Tangent. All right, go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Couple of questions. I have 4 questions, quick ones, I hope. I heard you say that the second tranche scoring has been delayed for the, I'm wondering about the third tranche. What is happening with that? Is it encountering the same problem? Is it, where is it in the process?
June, if I may.
Yeah, why not?
It's going to encounter the same problem. We're not going to move to round 3 scoring until we've completed round 2. I mean, our hope was to have round 2 before round 3 even came in, but many of the delays are due to address issues, and we can't score the proposals until we have an accurate set of addresses that are being proposed to be served. So that has delayed us quite a bit, but we will do round 2 and then round 3. And I think round 3 is going to go quicker than round 2 once we get started, just because we'll have less proposals to deal with, and we'll have most of the proposals worked out in tandem with round 2.
Can I just at a high level inquire about, what is the process for rectifying this? Are you having to go back to all of the folks who submitted applications for additional information? Are you having to restart the process? And really the nature of my query is, where are we at? I'm trying to understand where we're at with getting dollars out.
Right.
If all the dollars are going to go out, if there's room for us to, make some modifications if we, if we've hit a major snag and a big time crunch.
So it's Clay.
I don't think that, thank you for the question. It's a good question. I don't think we're hitting a major snag. I think what we have are a lot of carriers that never participated in Connectivity Initiative, doing it for the first time, so they're not used to it. We've had carriers, assert that they're going to serve addresses that to our records don't exist, or are already served, or are already served by the carrier who's proposing to serve them. And we certainly don't want to provide funding to addresses that are already served at 25.3. So, we're encountering those kind of issues. It can be tedious, and that has delayed our formal notification to the CUDs, because the CUDs obviously want an accurate list of addresses. So I don't know that I would consider it a major issue or an issue that we have to start over on. It really involves just a back and forth with the carriers to figure out, what it is they actually meant to send us, so that we can get an accurate list together. So I don't know how much more I can say on it other than it's just a tedious administrative burden that we're just going to have to slog through.
This might be a better clarifying question. Do you have a sense of when you will be at the point that you are awarding both the second tranche and the third tranche? And when I say when, I mean roughly, in what weeks or months that will happen.
Right. I'm anticipating that we will have, we can begin scoring on Tuesday, and we'll be notifying the CUDs on or before then with the official list of addresses. So 7 days from Tuesday. And then round 3, we'll be working on next. That might be as early as the same week or the following week. So 7 days from this Tuesday, then at most, I would think 7 days from that Tuesday. It's not ideal. We would have liked to have them out by the end of the month, but the situation is what it is.
I think it also, what I would add to that too is folks should realize that we are already oversubscribed in terms of the funding. So we have $12 million for this program, but we have projects well in excess of that already, which is why we think the third round is going to go very quickly.
How about for the line extensions? Are you oversubscribed on that, or where are you at in terms of usage? Do you think you're going to spend all those funds?
At this time, as I just said a moment ago, I think that subscription there will accelerate, but I am not confident that we will spend $2 million. But I wanted to get to that point for you, Representative Sibilia, because I heard you talking about tweaking and the like, and I appreciate how scarce these dollars are and how precious they are. But I would just caution the committee to consider that there are certain reliance interests that go with standing up a program and telling people these programs are there, especially in the connectivity initiative realm. It will prove that much more difficult for us to administer a program if halfway through the funding is in any way negatively adjusted, or if we start getting too into the weeds and fine tuning, we're just going to break the back of the department to administer these programs. So I would just caution the committee on that point. And if it's of any help to anybody, it is periodically just remind yourselves, we are dealing with an emergency.
Yeah.
And we're doing our best to make the relief that we administer in the emergency track with our long-term goals and hit as many markers as we can. But push come to shove, this is about getting connectivity out to kids and telehealth folks and remote workers as quickly as we can during an emergency.
And just as a clarification, the $2 million for the line extension program is a cap, I believe, that that money can be used as part of the larger pool of connectivity initiative dollars.
Indeed, that's correct too, yes. I think you have a couple more questions, Representative Sibilia.
Yeah, I do. I'm almost done though. My question about tweaking, my guess is my chair is disciplined enough that we're not gonna tweak at all, as much as I would like to. My question about tweaking, as you know, but some of our committee may not know, I'm actually pretty upset about the VTEL. I'm disappointed about the VTEL awards. For the reason that VTEL has already been awarded once dollars to provide service to virtually every unserved address in Vermont. I know that your department has been working overtime extraordinarily to bring connectivity to every Vermonter, thinking about these kids, thinking about telehealth. And I know that that is the context in which you are making those awards. And we've already had a discussion at the Joint IT Oversight Committee about holding them to a different standard of accountability than they have been held to in the past. I would just say I want to make sure that I mention here in this committee the notion that has occurred to me that perhaps we should have used VTEL's protected status to prevent them from accessing dollars that here in Vermont, they are able to, because of their protected status for their federal project, they are able to prevent a number of other carriers and CUDs from accessing dollars for connectivity. And so that's something I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware I will be thinking about in the future, if that's something that we maybe should consider. And I think, Mr. Chair, that is the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Representative Yantochka.
Okay, my questions relate to the line extension program. So could you repeat how many applications you've received so far and how much money is that accounts for $2 million?
Yes, our up-to-date data is 163 applications so far, 39 of which have been approved, and the total amount is $80,213.
8,000 or 80?
No, 80.
80,000. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing is, I'm disappointed that Consolidated has decided not to participate. I have, well, Charlotte, my town of Charlotte is served by Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom mostly, but I have constituents on the very edge of Consolidated territory who are still on 4.1 speed connections. And if Consolidated isn't participating, then how can they get connections through the line extension program?
I think the very unfortunate answer is that the state has no means of compelling that. So what I would recommend, Mike, is that you have these constituents contact Consolidated on an individual basis. You can certainly let us know who they are, and we can take this up on a case-by-case basis with Consolidated. I think, I don't want to speak for the company, so I'm not going to, but my experience in observing conduct is that there are firm no's and then there are soft no's. And in a nutshell, what happens here, without spending too much time on it, is that in borrowing from the cable extension formula that's typically used to assess contribution and aid of construction and the like, the carriers find themselves in a position where there's a certain tipping point on line extensions to where they wind up having to bear the entire cost of the extension. For instance, that neighborhood of 13 folks in Waterbury, add 3 more households to it and you've got 16, and suddenly the entire project has to be borne by the carrier and there is no contribution in aid of construction from the individuals. So there comes a point where the companies have to look at this math and say, is this consistent with our business plan? Did we expect to be spending these kinds of dollars in aggregate on line extensions this year? Or did we have our capital dollars set aside for other things? The bottom line is, it is unfortunate in the aggregate. I have found that there can be individual solutions or the company will come across. But yes, I share your disappointment.
Yeah, so are you saying that if 13 people request assistance, then the burden falls on them to kick in the money?
Correct.
If they get up to 15, then it falls
16.
on the company, or 16, then it falls on the company.
Correct.
Carrier, and they don't want to do it. So if you've got more than 15 people, you're likely not to get cooperation from the company?
Precisely, and should be absolutely clear, we have to draw a distinction between cable companies and the program that's been stood up under H966, which borrows from the cable company rule. What I just told you about the compulsory nature of that formula applies to cable companies. In borrowing that formula for the H966 program, that was a convenient tool to use in order to stand the program up. But by definition, the program itself is voluntary for the companies because we're talking about broadband. And that is not a matter that we have jurisdiction over. Does that help you?
Well, it explains. Not sure how much of a help it is.
Oh, it doesn't help. That's true. But it's, you know, it's just if you keep in mind when we embarked on this journey in March and April, it was a given that we were talking about all hands on deck, everybody doing their best, everybody putting their best foot forward. And there are many instances where companies like Consolidated have done commendable things during this emergency. But it is proving the case as we implement H966 that not every opportunity for cooperation that we need in order to get an optimal outcome is in fact going to be able to materialize. And that's what we get for trying very hard to do a lot with dollars that are very constrained in their use. But what I tell myself in dark moments, for what it's worth, is that, you know, this time last year, none of this funding was on the horizon. And it's a silver lining of the pandemic, and I could just wish it could go farther.
Representative Campbell?
I have one more question, if you don't mind, or a comment. And that is, looking at the broadband map, this particular road that these folks are on, it's marked in green as if they had, you know, the adequate internet access.
Yep.
The fact is that they don't.
Yep. And so if I could ask you to have them contact us and we can get to the bottom of this discrepancy. But what you have just illustrated, Mike, is a perfect example of what is bedeviling us in round 2 of the connectivity initiative. Is that the data that we maintain, which I maintain is very good data, inevitably has a counterpart that lives with the carriers, and the two don't necessarily match up, and there are a variety of good reasons why that is the case. So the thing to do is to double check with us, and we can if there is an error that can benefit your constituent, we'll certainly find it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Scott.
Can I say
Oh.
something else about the line extension program? Goes along with what June had said. You know, another issue that we're running into with the LECAP program, well, there's a couple of issues. I see Representative Chase has asked a question in the chat about residents trying to utilize the program without much success. The interest in line extensions has been overwhelming since we launched the program, and several of the providers their construction teams are overwhelmed with line extension requests. So they're out doing estimates, which we need to have an estimate before we can entertain an application. You know, they're getting inundated with requests for those estimates, which is putting a strain on them and obviously slowing down the process for everybody. But then the other is that some of these projects get big enough where the carrier is very uncertain as to whether they can actually do the line extension by December 30, which is a requirement of the CARES guidelines. So we're having to be very careful about double checking with the carrier to ensure that this can actually be done before the end of the year, so that we don't run afoul of the CARES Act guidelines. So any extension that can be made to the use of this funding, either at the federal level or at the state level, would be incredibly helpful to us and relieve some of the pressure But I think the carriers, including Consolidated, are probably feeling about getting these line extensions done.
Yeah, Clay, thank you for adding that. That's what I meant to convey in saying that the carriers are having to choose between whether they're going to put their resources toward the connectivity initiative or the line extensions, and the granularity Clay has provided you is just one example of rabbit holes we have all over the place in implementing H966. But I have to tell you, even if I am bragging a little bit, my staff is returning serve on every one of these. Very few of these balls get past them. And in turn, the carriers and the other stakeholders are also staying in the game, and everybody, I think, is using best efforts and good faith to make as much of a success of this as we can. There have been no skunks at this party.
Scott?
I have two questions, one about the line extension program and the other about the broadband subsidy. On the line extension program, what portion of the line extensions are cable, video cable, versus anything else? And I guess what is the anything else?
Scott, that's a really good question. And unless Clay has granular data on that, I'm not in a position to answer it. But that doesn't mean we can't answer it. I just don't have that data at my fingertips. Clay,
Well,
are you able to?
At a high level, I would say the majority of the line extensions are with Comcast. We have a few with Charter, quite a few with EC Fiber as well.
Okay.
Waitsfield Champlain Valley also has a handful coming in. So I would say that those companies represent probably the most line extension requests that we've gotten, but by far and away it's Comcast. And the cable companies, because we're leveraging a rule that applies to cable video service, the cable companies I think are a little more nimble in responding to line extension requests because they already have a process in place to comply with the rule, whereas some of the other telecoms are looking at the cable line extension rule for the first time and trying to understand it.
And for the phone company, the Champlain Valley, Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom, are they stringing fiber?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah,
Okay.
they are actually have a significant fiber penetration in their service territory, and I think that's their preference.
Okay.
Clay, I want to say that Waitsfield Champlain Valley is also at the heart of one of the real success stories in the first round. There was that project that the community really came together and designed and documented, and I think, Chair Breglin, they sent you a copy of their work as well. And they were able to work with Waitsfield Champlain Valley, and as a result, we were able to give a grant for that project. It's going to mean a big deal to a group of folks in an area that's very hard to reach. So I thought the committee should just be aware of that. It's a really good example of how folks are pulling together to maximize the success of this program, considering that a lot of what the legislature and the agencies are having to do is build cars as we drive them. So I can't say enough about the goodwill and the good faith that these companies are exhibiting in working with us to get this done.
Are there any other telephone companies participating?
The reason I'm hesitating is because we do have a grant process underway right now, Scott.
Okay.
So we have the first round. Clay, can you say more on this, or should we?
Yes, you don't have to say who.
Is discretion the better part of valor?
I think we may have a few applications for some of the other telephone companies.
Okay.
You know, one or two, something like that.
That's fine.
So I don't have an exact number, but you know, so most of the other telephone companies, their footprint is so small that they might not even get an application.
Right.
Waitsfield is I would consider them the second or third largest telephone company after Consolidated. So.
Okay, great, thanks. On the broadband subsidy, June, I think you said $28 a month. I thought I thought
20. I'm sorry, my diction is not great. Either that or maybe my microphone isn't great. It's $20.
20. That's what I thought. And my understanding is that is retroactive to March, but then it would end in December. Is that
I'm going to ask Clay to speak to those
Yeah.
parameters. Go ahead, Clay.
That's correct. We can't pay
Right.
for anything in calendar year 21. Those are the CRF guidelines as we understand them. This
So
is
it's
an
very
area where we'd love to have an extension. We know the pandemic will go into January.
Right.
Unfortunately,
very-
the money doesn't. So
very short-term help for people, really. Okay.
it is, but you know, I think one of the values of setting up the program is that if there is an extension, you know, we're ready to go and can provide continued funding until the resources run out.
Great. I just wanted to be sure I understood. Thank you.
Representative Chase?
Yeah, just right quick, I was wondering if I could ask June and or Clay to send me the contact info of whoever was involved in that that Waterbury project, so I might be able to connect them with my neighbors and maybe they can knowledge share and get their project moving a little bit.
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, I think there's a large project that my staff is working on today in Colchester that you might be aware of.
That northern. I've been getting some contact from the residents involved with that are expressing frustration at like they aren't getting. I know you guys are busy, and I know the carriers are busy. So I wasn't sure if there was anything else we could help.
Yeah, I've got someone working on it now, so I understand their frustration, and you know, this program is kind of putting everyone pushing everyone's abilities to their limit, but we are aware of it, and I hope I think that's one that we could probably do, and I'm hopeful that we'll get that reviewed and approved quickly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
But yeah.
Mike, I'd ask you to be quick. We really got to start.
Okay, last question is regarding the priority locations map. I see, and I heard also from a librarian that there are about 7 or 8 families that have school kids and don't have adequate Wi-Fi connection. Thinking about setting up hotspots, is that something that would fall under line extension, or is that possible to do under any of the programs?
The Wi-Fi hotspots, I would not have put them under line extension. That is something that we have separately done, Mike, with different monies as well. Although H966 did have 50 grand in it to put toward that. And the governor, I think, has suggested $150,000 be allocated of the remaining CRF funds toward Wi-Fi hotspots, but that's to deal with what has already been deployed. We are aware that there are a few more communities that are hopeful of getting Wi-Fi hotspots, and we would like to fund that if possible. We have some dollars left over here, something on the order of $433,000 that would be a good use for. Item 1 would be for this librarian to contact Rob Fish in our office, and we can see what can be done.
Okay, thank you. That's a help.
Yep.
Commissioner, I would love to spend a lot of time on arrearages today, but only because I think from the Appropriations Committee's perspective, the FY21 budget requests take priority, and we don't have a huge amount of time left. I think I'd like to turn to those now, if that works for you. And again, I think I'd highlighted 3 things, and maybe there's others, but there's a $2 million request in there related to CUD financing. kind of a segue to Mike's comment. I thought it was $125,000. Maybe it's 150, but
No,
some of my,
125 sounds right. And what
Okay,
you guys had allocated was 50.
right, that's
So,
right, to hotspots. And then the third item was just, I want to touch base on the $300,000 for telecom planning that this committee had made a recommendation on back in January. I think for whatever reason that is not in this budget at this point, but those are the three areas I wanted to touch on, and maybe there's others as well, but I'll hand the mic back to you.
Well, unless you object, I'm going to say we've pretty much dealt with the Wi-Fi hotspots in answering Mike's question. So
So before we leave that, let me ask a
Yes.
question, and I don't know if this is if this is too much of a budgetary sleight of hand. My recollection is that in H966, in the portion of the bill that the up to $50,000 for Wi-Fi hotspots, that was the portion of the bill that dealt with connectivity. I think it was section 13 of the bill. And there was flexibility within that pool of capital as to how that money could be deployed. We did put a cap on the Wi-Fi hotspot money. I'm wondering if on the margin, we could raise that cap such that the department could make sure that they received full, reimbursement through CRF funding for those Wi-Fi hotspots. Again, acknowledging the scarcity of one-time money, and if there's a way to potentially skin the cat there.
Well, yes. So I'm going to say wildly irresponsible things here, and you'll check me as necessary. But as I was indicating just a moment ago, a rather peculiar sum was allocated to us in H966. It was $17,433 in section 13. That was spread.
$17,433,000.
Yeah, all of which was spread over most of the programs that we've discussed this morning. But there's $433,500 of those dollars that are sort of out there that we haven't allocated to any one program today. And we were sort of holding them in reserve to see where should we spread them, where would they most be needed. And certainly the connectivity initiative program is a candidate, but the Wi-Fi hotspots bear consideration. And my memory is that the Wi-Fi hotspots were separately provided for. I'm not finding it in my notes right now, and I apologize. So what I mean to say is, to the extent I'm being irresponsible, it's suggesting that I just do this, but I would prefer if there were express legislative authority to do this, to take some of those $433,000 and put them toward Wi-Fi hotspots, because as clunky as the device may seem, they have proven very effective. And I think I want to say we gave you a map to show you where they are in the state.
You had, yeah, I think you did.
And if not, it's certainly on our website, and it's something to be proud of. When I think about where we were in March.
I see Representative Feltus's hand up. Marty, did you have any thoughts on this?
I just wanted to clarify, my understanding of the money we did in 966 was up to $50,000 for the purpose of being the match for, you thought you were going to get a FEMA grant in order to cover those, but you needed some general fund or some CRF money to provide that match. You have since now not received that grant. So my presumption is that this 125 we're looking for now is to cover what you thought was going to be FEMA, and the 50,000 was the match that would have been required as well. So we need both of those, the 125 and the 50, in order to cover what you've already done. And then if you want some leeway on this little extra 400,000 that's kind of, hanging out there in limbo, probably there's a legislative change that could just say funds could be moved from between items 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 as the department feels reasonable when you get close to the end of December.
That I agree wholeheartedly with everything you just said. I'm sorry to say that FEMA has turned down our request. We are appealing it, but I think it would be wise to assume that the appeal will fail.
I think we should consider, June, if it would be your recommendation, and Marty, if you think it's something that the Appropriations Committee would consider, and again, we've got 8 other members of the Energy and Technology Committee sitting here today, but I think we should consider that possibility of freeing up more, I'll call it H966 money, CRF money, that could be used for this purpose. Absent that, we're going to be using one-time money, I believe. It's not one-time money.
No, I'm shuddering at the idea because the hotspots are so squarely something covered by CRF.
Yeah, I mean,
that
it seems very logical.
it's one of the few risk-free propositions we have for spending the money.
So, Marty, I think we should think about that in terms of how your committee, might deal with this in the budget. Okay, so let's move on to.
We can simply.
Go ahead.
We can develop language that would allow flexibility for any unallocated funds in that original 17 million
Precisely.
to be spread around the various 5 areas, unless you want to say it can only be spread to one area. But we can work on that, how you would prefer to have that flexibility.
Happy to work with you however you need. I would recommend that flexibility.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's turn the page to $2 million request for CUDs and then the telecom planning.
So the $2 million request has excited a lot of interest from many quarters. I've seen a number of letters come in from a variety of stakeholders saying, please do this. The school community has said as much. I think AARP has written in about it as well. I know the CUDs are very interested in this money. The backstory on it, frankly, is that there were high hopes that there would be a grant award from the Northern Borders Regional Commission. And we had been doing some work to put that on the table as a match with the Vermont Community Foundation. And they had sizable dollars that they were willing to put toward that. And then unfortunately, but this is what happens in a competitive grant process, the CUD project simply did not prevail with Northern Borders. A different connectivity project did, which is fine, but not that one. And so a variety of people scrambled within the administration to say, how can we find some money so that we can also continue to dialogue with Vermont Community Foundation? And this is the result. So the idea is for this money to be banked, if you will, for the benefit of CUDs. It would go through the department, and we would be administering it as a resource for them to provide the 10% match that they have to come up with when they try to access the VITA loan facility that came available through H513 last year. That's the short and the long of it from my perspective. I don't want to get into the weeds if you don't want to, because time is scarce, but as you perhaps have heard, there is also quite a discussion going on right now about poll data harvesting and the need for the CUDs to be able to plan their projects using good and accurate poll data, but there not being money to fund a project immediately that would allow them to get this data in the fall so that they can do their planning over the winter, so that they could be in a position to secure funding and put shovels in the ground next year for system projects that they're targeting. So that's a competing consideration, and this committee may want to weigh that and also hear from the CUDs about this. But you should understand that when this was proposed in the governor's budget, that poll harvesting data issue was not in mind.
Yeah. So I would like to make a comment on this, but it's probably as much in the form of a question.
Yeah.
And I understand that there's going to be some CUD testimony in Senate Finance today. I hope some of those folks are listening because my question might be for them as well. I am a huge supporter of more public support for our CUDs. And I think we have done this in committee in the form of Act 79. I think we've done it in the form of money that we have directed towards standing up CUDs in CRF funding. And when I look at this $2 million as support for CUDs, the headline speaks very favorably to me. And reading the letters of support from the CUDs that are posted on our website today, it's not entirely clear to me that the support that the CUDs have written into our committee that is supporting this $2 million fully line up with what this money is actually going to be used for and the timing in which it can be used. Because I see this $2 million as money that will support CUDs that are ready, that have shovel-ready projects to string fiber. And this money will support, I'll call it the equity money, that will allow them to draw down VITA loans. VITA is going to support, up to 90% loan to value on these projects. Currently, CUDs have to put up at least 10%, maybe more in some cases, depending on their lending source. And this money that's being proposed here, this $2 million, would be extremely valuable in supporting CUDs to help them get into that project mode and spending mode. That said, where my sense is we are in terms of CUDs around the state being ready to jump into shovel-ready projects, my sense is we're not there. My sense is that there is a lot of work that needs to be done before we get to that jumping off point. One of the things that you mentioned, Commissioner, is some of the poll survey work, make-ready work that's got to be done before construction can actually begin on these projects. Some of these CUDs have literally just become organized in the last 3 to 6 months. So I guess a question I have is that while this money is extremely valuable to get to a point where CUDs can start to, essentially light this fiber to serve customers, it seems like step, 4 or 5 in the process. And do the CUDs have the resources to kind of get through step 2, 3, and 4 before we get there? And I'm worried that we're going to set aside this $2 million that's may not be utilized or only has access for utilization by the CUDs who are most fully kind of up the design curve, and that might be the Northeast Kingdom, it might be CV fiber. So it's a question if this is the highest and best use of this money at this time. That's a question I have.
So I appreciate that, and much of what you said, Chairman Briglin, is chapter and verse from my own thoughts. I will tell you, it's been very engaging and invigorating to be part of this work that we've been doing with the state, with the CUDs for the last year and a half, because it's so transformative, and it's such an acceleration from where we have been for, if you go back 15 years when this all started. We're not going to nail everything at once, and we're going to have to make some choices. And so from my perspective, the thing that I have worried about most with the CUDs is that they're energized, they are formed, and then fatigue sets in because they say, well, we don't have the money to do any of this anyway. And then they drain away. And one of the things that bothered me, no criticism intended, simply a fact, but one of the things that bothered me about 513 was we set up the VITA loan facility, and there was this 10% gap that we knew about and that we knew was going to be a problem for these entities. So from my point of view, poll data harvesting and system planning are things that have many potential solution avenues. but the cold hard cash that it takes to come up with that 10% match, that's cold hard cash in a state where every dollar counts. So I can appreciate that we may have some reluctance to put $1 or $2 million aside, knowing that it's not going to be spent immediately. But I also fear that if we don't take the one-time dollars that we know we have right now, when there is broad consensus that this money is needed, it's going to get away from us. And then when they are ready, because we've devised other ways by which they can get the poll data and so forth, we're not going to be in a position to help them. And perhaps that's best, because I know there's a school of thought out there that says they ought to have skin in the game, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that. And I'm really not any better position than anybody else to make judgments about whether that should carry the day or not. Where I come at the issue is the CUDs are a nakedly state-sponsored effort to deal with a problem that we know is not going to go away if we leave the competitive markets to deal with this issue. And so from that perspective, I'm comfortable overcoming what qualms I might have about suggesting that the equity be supplied by the state, as opposed to having the entity have a 10% skin in the game exposure. So I like to think that I'm helpful to the committee, and I think on this one, you're going to have to take my assessment and put it in your sorting hat. And if it doesn't carry the day, I won't be offended, but that's my best thinking on the issue.
Okay, well, I've stated not necessarily my concern. It's just, it should go without saying. I want to make sure that we put our best foot forward to help the CUDs as quickly as possible, and kind of addressing the highest and best use for these dollars. One more question I'll have about this, I have about this $2 million. And this is more of a financing structure question. To kind of fill out the capital structure, if you will, of these projects, with $20 million coming from, let's say, VITA as a lender. And if we use this money for the subordinated piece, I am a big believer in these projects that they make financial sense. I think they ultimately will. And I think this money is going to be paid back in spades. I think these are cash flow positive projects. And I guess a question I have is, this is kind of a granular question. Would it be better to have this $2 million be used as subordinated debt that ultimately comes back to the state and can be recycled into other projects down the road, as opposed to a simple grant?
That's another great question. And my immediate take on that would be, that is another viable avenue to explore, just as it would be viable to also put some flexibility into these $2 million so that perhaps they don't necessarily have to be used just for the match. Maybe they could be earmarked for a 5% match, and then could also be used for other essential expenses that the CUDs are going to incur. The one thing I would highlight is that, as much as I share your optimism about these cash flow positive enterprises getting off the ground, if I didn't think it could happen, I don't think I would be as fierce an advocate for it as I am. I am always mindful that we are doing this on the backs of everyday people who have day jobs. And so I think there is a possibility that there will be some CUDs with folks who just are not in a position to do the kind of fundraising, who are simply going to need a leg up from the state. And so grants in that sense are an opportunity to put your best foot forward. And if you fail, it won't be for want of heart or effort or anything of the like. Loans, I suppose if we had very generous forgiveness terms, that's another way to approach it. In administering the Clean Energy Development Fund, we've certainly seen the benefit of having a revolving cycle. But even in the Clean Energy Development Fund, where we're dealing with fairly sophisticated entities as opposed to community groups who do this in their off hours, even there we have a segment of grants that we use. So food for thought.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. So I've a little bit inserted myself into your discussion on the $2 million proposal. Is there more that you'd like to share with the committee on that, or is that pretty
No,
straightforward?
I just want it to be perfectly clear that this is the governor's unambiguous statement of support for the CUDs. He has been watching the conversation like everybody else, and he sees the value, and that is where this statement is coming from. And for my governor, that's a big deal.
Yep.
It
And
says a lot, because those dollars are scarce, as Marty has said more than once.
Yep, and I applaud that, and I appreciate the governor, kind of putting his hand up for support for this. The question I continue to have is, in supporting the CUDs, is this particular arrow shot, if you will, the best way to do this at this time? But we'll resolve that shortly, I'm sure.
Did I make clear though my point that there may be many ways to get the pool data and so forth, but not many ways to find cash? Okay, we're done.
Yep, I'm good. I don't see any hands up on this. So, and I think we've covered Wi-Fi hotspots. Representative Higley, I'm sorry, and Representative Campbell. I thought I'd shake you guys loose there if I was about to move on.
You did. Thanks, Tim. I have the same concern. I think, as June stated, there's optimism here with CUDs, but looking at it realistically and sitting down even with the select boards when folks were coming in with the proposals, the select boards were pretty keen about, hey, is this going to come back on the towns? And of course, there was an assurance that no, it's not. And I guess I worry about headed down the road where on and on and on, the state is going to have to contribute more and more, and maybe even dig into the town's pockets. And I don't know what assurances we can. There's no assurances that we can put forth to alleviate that, but. That's a concern of mine as well as a lot of local towns, select boards and so on. So it's a concern for me as well.
Oh, yeah, okay. You're muted, Tim, but I think you said me. And my question is just, this is one-time money? Remind me where this is coming from?
The $2 million is one-time money from the the excess revenues, if you can call it that we're fortunate to be fighting over right now. Yeah.
Okay. I thought so, but I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, it's very important, Scott, that everybody understand that this is not CRF money that's subject to the December 31st spending deadline.
Yes, thank you.
And that too is part of its magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing no other hands up. June, can we turn to telecom planning?
Yes.
And even though actually the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it's not actually in the governor's recommended budget. Back in January, this committee, taking a look at the governor's recommends and giving feedback to the appropriations committee, there was $300,000 in the FY21 budget for telecom planning, which we supported that recommendation to the appropriations committee. When the world got turned upside down and we were in CRF land, we found and I will also say, my understanding is that the Senate supported much more money to go towards telecom planning. And I think what we did to kind of be accommodative of their interests and the money before us with CRF and the needs for planning is to put $500,000 of money to go towards emergency telecom planning in the CRF funds in H966, with the thinking that we were still going to have $300,000 in the FY21 budget. That doesn't seem to be there at this point. And maybe there's an answer to that, maybe there's not. But that is something that we'll have to figure out in the legislature if we're going to be, supportive of finding $300,000 someplace to support. I think the telecom planning that we were envisioning 3 months ago when we adjourned in June. So I'm not sure if there's any commentary on that, or if I've kind of kind of recall how I think we got to where we were in at the end of June on this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I frankly was not aware that the $300,000 was not in the restated budget proposal. This came to my attention from other quarters, and I sent up a query to find out whether this was by omission or deliberate. And I haven't gotten to the bottom of it completely, but the early returns suggest to me that there may have been some confusion in that some folks on the administration side may have thought that this was dealt with through the Budget Adjustment Act, which I have chased down and concluded is not the case. So leaving aside purpose or not, it's not there. And if it's going to be there, it's going to need to be put in there. This is a very bedeviling issue that the legislature has been intent on for some time. And the facts do keep changing on us as we work our way through this. Most significantly, what has changed is that the delivery deadline for this plan, from my perspective, at least is significant, has changed from I believe it was December of this year to June of next year, which is hugely helpful. Another fact that has changed is that as of July 1, you indeed did appropriate $500,000 of CARES money toward the telecom plan, and that was in nobody's viewshed when the $300,000 proposal was made originally. The work that goes into the $500,000 emergency planning, by the way, we have selected a vendor, and that is going through that contract is now going through its process of review, and particularly with Guidehouse, the administration's consultants for CRF expenditures. That $500,000 project is going to require a deal of analysis that I am told is transferable to what we would do for the regular 10-year telecom plan anyway. So I don't want to go so far as to say that this $500,000 is going to pay for the work product that we would have otherwise purchased using $300,000 for the telecom plan, but it certainly will take us down that path, and that may be relevant to your deliberations about whether you want to put $300,000 more into the pot. But the department is certainly willing, prepared, and able to spend an additional $300,000 on telecom planning if that is the desire of the legislature at this point. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, well, I will make sure that we are in close touch with Marty and the House Appropriations Committee on this. I'm also going to, well, I know you're headed from our Zoom room to
yes, I'm sure it will come up there, and I would recommend that you be in touch with your colleagues in the Senate. I don't mean to intrude on your work at all, but I know this has been a priority over there in Senate Finance, and I want to be absolutely sure that their desires are met and addressed, and with transparency.
Yep. I will do that. Are there other things that you would like to share with us, Commissioner Tierney, or I'll also obviously open it up to members and Representative Felthus. Those are the items that were on my list from a budget perspective that I wanted to cover with DPS today. And again, that's with the idea of tabling the arrearages discussion. Maybe we can get you for a half an hour at some point next week to cover that.
I think that would be wise because, well, actually not next week, but the following week, because Riley Allen, my deputy, has been the point person on designing that program. And you may, if you want to get in the weeds on it, you really ought to have him on board. But I will say this, it may seem to the committee members that the deployment of these programs is not proceeding at a pace. And I'm sure you can see from the conversation that we've had and the documents we filed that we are proceeding as quickly as we can. None of us, whether you or we, have had perfect knowledge about how to deal with this crisis. I monitor the press and the academic publication nationally in other states. That's what I do as a matter of discipline. And I have to say, there are things that this legislature is doing that are just remarkable, and they stand out. The Arrearages program is one of them. And you have very much to be proud of. Your little state is packing a real punch in how you're using these CARES dollars. And we hear it, you know, my favorite feedback that we've had today was from a teacher who did get a line extension and who said, you know, they should be throwing rose petals in your path. That's the love we got. I don't know that you folks are getting that love, but I'm passing it on to you because sure, we got to, you know, do the fun part of handing out the relief, but we couldn't have done it without your support. So please, when you get tired, just remember there was this moment when this commissioner said to you, you're doing a darn good job. I know that sounds a lot like a heck of a job brownie from Hurricane Katrina, but that said, I mean it. And I'm willing to stand by that assessment. I'm very proud of what you're doing. I'm very proud of what my folks are doing, and very proud of my governor, of course. So
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Representative Feltus, I saw your hand go up. Did you have a question or comment?
Just one last comment. I echo everything Commissioner Tierney had just said, but in terms of information that the Appropriations Committee needs, obviously, there are these various topics that I need a comment or an endorsement from your committee on whether we should go forward on many of these items that were in the budget. There's one other very small item. The governor has put in $100,000 for a study on future financing possibilities for the public access televisions. This is of interest to you, I believe. I believe it's also of interest to the Commerce Committee. And so at some point soon, I need a comment from your committee whether you would endorse that additional appropriation or whether it's something that can be delayed for another time or if there's another way to solve the problem. I don't know. But I know it's something that you had acted on once before.
Yeah, so, and let's see if I get this correct. In H966, there was a section that didn't have funding attached to it, but that did highlight that we would be looking for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to essentially be the agency that stands behind this study, but there was no funding for that study. So this is an ACCD initiative, if you will. And this comes on the heels of a legislative study group that did work a year ago. And one of the recommendations of that group was to come back to the legislature to recommend additional funding to kind of get to the bottom of how to find financing, if you will, to support public access television stations in the state of Vermont. Their current stream of funding, which primarily comes through cable television network providers, is starting to dry up, and that's the challenge. So that's what that is for. Just to give members kind of background on that. I believe, for better or for worse, the Commerce Committee has handed this ball to us. This ball, I think, has been thrown around among committee chairs, and I was hoping it was going to be a jump ball between me and Mark Cott, which I think I would have won, but he insisted it be a game of tag, and I think I got tagged last. So I think we are it in terms of providing to you guys.
Even though there was no money attached to it in H966, the intent was to check and see if maybe we could use CRF funding, but it has been determined it's not an appropriate use for CRF funding. So the reason it's in the budget is just a regular general fund. It's a one-time expense being suggested by the governor to do this.
And Marty, just
my committee needs a go ahead.
Yeah, and for my clarification and for my committee's clarification, and this is going to guide probably our first meeting next week, we have not a long laundry list, but a laundry list of items to make recommendations to you on. When do you need that by? Hopefully it's not the end of today. But
the very,
I know
no,
it's ASAP.
the very latest Wednesday.
Okay.
ASAP, but the very latest Wednesday.
Okay, so this is work that we are going to do and have committee discussion on Tuesday, and ask our committee to make recommendations on each of these items, and we will get you, or I will get you and Kitty an email on our recommendations on hopefully by the end of the day Tuesday.
Perfect. Thank you. That would be very helpful for us.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts from committee members, or June or Clay? I think you're both still here.
Yeah, no, lunch.
Yeah. Well, you got 10 minutes before you get
Yeah.
to the minutes.
Or at least water.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any hands up, so thank our guests. Thank you, June and Clay, and others if you're still here. Thanks, Dan Smith, for joining us today. And thank you, committee members, for hanging in there for this discussion. We did need to use this time. And I'll see the rest of you on the floor in 40 minutes. So thank you. Take care.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.